Ladies and gentlemen, when we ask how Israel strikes against Hamas in Doha, we must understand that this is not a matter of bombs and bullets in the skies of Qatar. It is a battle fought in the shadows of diplomacy, intelligence, and international influence. Israel sees Hamas not just as a militant group in Gaza, but as a global network with safe havens, financiers, and political backers far beyond the battlefield. First, the strategic context. Qatar has long been a host to Hamas leadership in Doha, offering him space to maneuver, raise funds, and build international connections. To Israel, this is not a distant problem, it is a direct threat. Every decision made in Doha can echo across the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Second, the operational approach. Israel does not strike Doha with missiles. It strikes with intelligence leaks, diplomatic campaigns, financial tracking, and pressure through allies, quiet negotiations. Covert surveillance and targeted exposure of Hamas networks are the weapons of choice. The intent is to choke the oxygen Hamas receives abroad while minimizing direct escalation with Qatar itself. Third, the global implications. This conflict is not Israel's alone. The security of the Middle East, the energy stability tied to the Gulf, and the credibility of international counterterrorism coalitions are all on the line. By acting against Hamas influence in Doha, Israel signals that terror cannot find refuge, no matter how wealthy or influential the host nation may be. This is not a traditional battlefield. It is a long campaign fought in boardrooms, embassies, and intelligence hubs. Israel's message is clear. Hamas may find shelter, but it will not find safety. When we examine Israel's focus on Qatar as a host to Hamas leadership, the starting point must be the strategic picture. For decades, Hamas has not only operated on the ground in Gaza, but also maintained external headquarters in places far removed from the immediate conflict. Doha has emerged as one of the most critical of these hubs. From Israel's perspective, this is not simply about political hospitality. It is about giving a terrorist organization the space to plan, finance, and coordinate operations that reach directly into Israeli territory. Allowing Hamas leaders to sit comfortably in Doha while directing strategy against Israel is seen as a red line that cannot go unchallenged. Qatar's role adds another layer of complexity. As a Gulf state with vast energy resources and deep ties to the international system, Qatar commands a global platform that few small nations enjoy. It funds media, influences regional policy, and presents itself as a mediator in conflicts. Yet behind that veneer, the presence of Hamas figures in its capital signals to Israel that Doha provides more than neutrality, it provides legitimacy. That legitimacy becomes dangerous when it allows Hamas to portray itself as a political player instead of the militant organization responsible for violence against civilians. Israel sees this dual role by Qatar as one of the most pressing challenges in its broader security strategy. For Israel, the threat is not just about Hamas leaders giving interviews in Doha. It is about the network of financial flows that can be routed through Qatari institutions, the access to global donors who operate comfortably in the Gulf, and the ability of Hamas to establish safe communication channels. Each of these factors extends Hamas's lifespan beyond Gaza, insulating it from the full impact of Israel's military campaigns. This means that as long as Hamas has the freedom to operate in Doha, no military victory in Gaza can be truly decisive. The group's brain and funding heart continue to beat thousands of miles away in the safety of another nation's capital. Another dimension of the strategic context is perception. Israel has invested heavily in portraying Hamas as an isolated terrorist organization that undermines peace in the region. When a state like Qatar hosts Hamas leaders, it undercuts that narrative. Suddenly, Hamas is not only tolerated, but seen on the same stage as diplomats and negotiators. That shift in perception damages Israel's efforts to keep Hamas contained diplomatically. It also emboldens Hamas to claim legitimacy on the global stage, weakening Israel's attempts to frame the group solely as a security threat. In this sense, the battle over Doha is not only about territory or money, it is about controlling the political story. Finally, the strategic context points toward why Israel considers countering Hamas in Doha a matter of national survival. Every rocket fired from Gaza, every tunnel uncovered along the border, every civilian targeted in Israeli cities is, in Israel's calculation, connected back to the freedom Hamas enjoys abroad. Without cutting off these external lifelines, Israel believes it will face an endless cycle of conflict. This is why Doha is not just a diplomatic irritation. It is a central battlefield, though fought with different tools. Israel knows as long as Hamas can breathe freely in Qatar, the fight at home will never truly end. When discussing how Israel strikes against Hamas in Doha, it is critical to understand that the word strike does not always mean bombs or missiles. The operational approach is far more subtle, layered, and deliberate. Israel knows that a direct attack inside Qatar would ignite global backlash and destabilize relations with powerful allies. Instead, it operates in the shadows of intelligence, diplomacy, and indirect pressure. The goal is the same as on the battlefield: weaken Hamas, disrupt its lifelines, and reduce its ability to threaten Israel. But the methods are tailored to the unique challenges of operating against an adversary sheltered in a foreign sovereign capital. The first layer of this approach is intelligence gathering and surveillance. Israel invests heavily in tracking Hamas leaders abroad, mapping their networks, and monitoring financial transfers. Doha becomes a point of interest not because missiles are launched from there, but because decisions are made there by knowing who meets whom, what money moves through which accounts, and which governments or organizations are in contact with Hamas officials. Israel builds the intelligence picture it needs. This intelligence is the foundation of every other tool in the operational playbook. The second layer is diplomatic maneuvering. Israel leverages its close ties with Western powers, especially the United States and European allies, to shine a light on Hamas's presence in Doha. This involves constant engagement with policymakers, quiet conversations in international forums, and calculated leaks to the media. The aim is to raise the cost for Qatar when world leaders question Doha's credibility as a mediator, or when its international image is tarnished by association with Hamas. Israel achieves a strategic win without firing a shot. A third element is financial warfare. Hamas relies on money more than anything else. Without it, weapons cannot be purchased, tunnels cannot be built, and propaganda cannot be spread. Israel tracks financial flows tied to Hamas and works with global banking systems to restrict or block those channels. When accounts are frozen, when donors are exposed, or when international organizations pull back funding out of fear of reputational damage, Hamas loses vital oxygen. Doha, with its powerful financial sector, becomes a battlefield in this invisible war. The fourth operational tactic is information and narrative control. Israel knows that in today's world, perception is as powerful as weapons. Through intelligence leaks, media briefings, and strategic communication, Israel works to expose Hamas leaders enjoying luxury in Doha while civilians in Gaza suffer. This narrative undermines Hamas's claim of being a resistance movement and instead paints it as a group of elites exploiting their own people. Every headline that questions why Doha hosts such leaders is another strike against Hamas's global legitimacy. Another operational channel is covert disruption. While rarely acknowledged publicly, Israel has a long history of using intelligence agencies to disrupt enemy activities abroad. This does not always mean targeted killings or high-profile operations. Sometimes it is about sowing mistrust within Hamas's leadership, creating logistical difficulties, or quietly warning potential supporters that dealing with Hamas in Doha carries hidden risks. The goal is not to provoke a crisis with Qatar, but to make Hamas's life in Doha uncomfortable, uncertain, and less effective. The sixth element of the operational approach is alliances with regional powers. Israel carefully builds relationships with countries that view Hamas as a destabilizing force, such as Egypt, the UAE, and even Saudi Arabia. These nations, though often balancing their ties with Qatar, understand the risks of Hamas's influence. Israel quietly coordinates with them to apply collective pressure. When Hamas finds fewer doors open across the region, its reliance on Doha becomes a liability, not an advantage. The seventh operational dimension is deterrence through indirect signaling. Israel occasionally makes it clear through public speeches, military posturing, or covert messages that it views Hamas's overseas operations as legitimate targets. While it avoids direct conflict with Qatar, the underlying message is that no sanctuary is truly safe. This kind of signaling is not random. It is calculated to remind Hamas leaders in Doha that their movements are being tracked, their options are narrowing, and their sense of safety is fragile. Finally, Israel's operational approach rests on long-term persistence. This is not a campaign measured in weeks or months. It is a constant, grinding effort to tighten the circle around Hamas wherever it operates. Doha is one theater among many, but it is a critical one. Israel does not expect an overnight victory. Instead, it seeks to degrade Hamas's overseas networks piece by piece, year by year, until the cost of hosting them becomes too high for any nation, including Qatar, to bear. The struggle between Israel and Hamas does not end at the borders of Gaza or the confines of Doha. Its ripple effects extend outward, shaping regional alignments, testing global counterterrorism policies, and influencing the stability of international markets. When Israel applies pressure on Qatar for its role in hosting Hamas, the consequences reverberate far beyond the Middle East. The global implications are as significant as the local battles, and they cannot be ignored. First, there is the matter of regional stability in the Middle East. Qatar is not a marginal player. It is a wealthy Gulf state with outsized influence due to its energy exports, media power, and diplomatic reach. By hosting Hamas leaders in Doha, Qatar positions itself as both a mediator and an enabler. Israel's efforts to challenge this position inevitably create friction with other Arab states, particularly those who have normalized relations with Israel or are considering doing so. Every move against Hamas in Doha influences the delicate balance of trust and rivalry across the Gulf. Second, the conflict directly affects U.S. interests in the region. Washington maintains a massive military presence in Qatar, including Al Udeid Air Base, the largest American installation in the Middle East. At the same time, the United States is Israel's closest ally. This creates a complex diplomatic equation. How can Washington support Israel's campaign against Hamas while also maintaining its strategic partnership with Doha? Israel's actions against Hamas and Qatar therefore test American diplomacy and challenge its ability to balance competing interests without destabilizing the alliance system it relies on in the region. Third, the global fight against terrorism is at stake. The presence of Hamas leaders in Doha sends a troubling signal to other militant groups worldwide that political cover can be secured if the right host nation is willing. Israel's campaign to expose and disrupt Hamas abroad is therefore not only about its own security, but about upholding international norms against safe havens for terrorism. If Hamas can thrive in Doha without consequence, other groups may seek similar arrangements elsewhere, undermining decades of counterterrorism work. Fourth, energy security becomes part of the equation. Qatar is one of the world's leading exporters of liquefied natural gas LNG, a resource that powers industries and households across Europe and Asia. Any escalation between Israel and Qatar, even if indirect, carries the risk of disrupting these flows. Energy markets are sensitive to political shocks, and the perception of instability in Doha could trigger price fluctuations worldwide. Thus, Israel's strategy against Hamas and Qatar inadvertently touches global economic stability. Fifth, the perception of legitimacy is a global contest. Hamas thrives not only on weapons, but also on image. When its leaders appear on international media hosted by a wealthy Gulf state, they gain a veneer of political credibility. Israel works to strip away that legitimacy by exposing Hamas's violent actions and highlighting its presence in Doha as evidence of double dealing by Qatar. This battle of narratives influences how governments, NGOs, and ordinary citizens view the conflict, shaping global public opinion. Sixth, international organizations feel the pressure. The United Nations, the European Union, and humanitarian groups operating in the region must decide how to engage with Hamas's leadership. Israel's emphasis on Doha as a hub of Hamas activity complicates their diplomatic missions. Do they treat Qatar as a neutral mediator, or do they question its ties with a designated terrorist organization? These choices affect funding decisions, peace initiatives, and the credibility of international institutions. Seventh, Israel's campaign highlights the fractured unity of the Arab world. While some Gulf states quietly back Israel's position against Hamas, others defend Qatar's right to host political actors it sees as legitimate. This tension reveals the deeper rivalries among Arab nations, between those pushing for modernization and cooperation with Israel and those clinging to old alliances with Islamist movements. Israel's actions force these divisions into the open, reshaping the political map of the region. Eighth, the confrontation also impacts Turkey's role. Ankara has been a vocal supporter of Hamas, and its relationship with Doha is strong. When Israel pushes against Hamas in Qatar, it indirectly challenges Turkey as well. This triangulation complicates NATO dynamics, since Turkey remains a member of the alliance while supporting a group Israel and much of the West label as terrorists. The global implication is clear. Countering Hamas in Doha has consequences that stretch into Europe and the transatlantic alliance. Ninth, the situation feeds into Iran's broader strategy. Iran is Hamas's most significant backer in terms of weapons and military training. Doha, by providing political and financial sanctuary, complements Tehran's military support. Israel's challenge to Qatar is therefore also a move against Iranian influence. The wider implication is that the Israel-Qatar-Hamas triangle cannot be separated from the larger Israel-Iran rivalry, which itself destabilizes the entire Middle East and threatens global security. Tenth, the confrontation raises questions about the future of peace negotiations. Qatar often presents itself as a mediator in conflicts, including between Israel and Hamas. If Israel succeeds in discrediting Doha's role, the international community will need to find new mediators. That search could delay peace efforts or shift them to states less prepared to shoulder the responsibility. In this way, Israel's campaign against Hamas in Doha not only weakens Hamas, but also reshapes the broader architecture of diplomacy. 11th, global media narratives amplify the stakes. Qatar's Al Jazeera network is one of the most influential media outlets in the world, shaping opinions from Cairo to London to Washington. Israel's exposure of Hamas leaders in Doha becomes entangled in a media war, with every headline influencing public perception. The implication is that Israel's operational moves must always account for the information battlefield, where narratives can shift alliances just as powerfully as armies. 12th, the diaspora dimension cannot be overlooked. Palestinian communities around the world watch closely how Hamas is treated abroad. For some, Doha's hospitality to Hamas is a source of pride, symbolizing international recognition. For others, it represents a betrayal of genuine peace efforts. Israel's actions to delegitimize Hamas in Doha directly shape diaspora politics in Europe, North America, and beyond, influencing protests, policy debates, and even elections in democratic states. 13th, Israel's campaign has an impact on international law and sovereignty. By pressuring Qatar to expel or limit Hamas leaders, Israel tests the boundaries of how much one nation can dictate the internal policies of another. The outcome will set precedents for future conflicts worldwide. If Israel succeeds, it will strengthen the norm that harboring militant groups is unacceptable. If it fails, it risks normalizing the idea that powerful states can host designated terrorists without consequence. 14th, the global implications also reach into the arms trade and military industry. Every disruption of Hamas financing in Doha reduces its ability to purchase weapons on international black markets. This affects suppliers, smugglers, and intermediaries across multiple continents. Israel's targeting of Doha as a Hamas hub, therefore, has downstream effects on illegal arms networks in Africa, Asia, and Eastern Europe. In this sense, the operational campaign has ripple effects that weaken broader criminal economies. Finally, the 15th and most enduring global implication is the lesson for the future of warfare. The Israel Qatar Hamas triangle demonstrates that modern conflict is not only about armies clashing in deserts or cities, it is about financial systems, diplomatic leverage, narrative warfare, and the politics of safe havens. The world is watching how Israel conducts this campaign because it sets the model for how states will confront transnational militant groups in the decades ahead. The message is unmistakable. The battlefield is everywhere, and global security depends on denying sanctuaries to organizations that thrive on violence.